Rousimar Palhares is the dirtiest fighter of all time, and I can't think of a close second. He was a world-class submission specialist who left roughly half the fighters he faced unable to walk out of the cage from over-cranking heel hooks and holding on to submissions for way too long. He would completely ignore taps and referee stoppages, and did this so often that he was eventually cut by the UFC.
With Palhares, where he had the lock and he didn't let it go. Finally, he let it go, but yeah, I'm gonna cut him too.
And was later cut by the World Series of Fighting, despite being one of the top welterweights on those rosters. He did not give one single fuck. To make things worse for Toquinho's public perception, he also popped for elevated testosterone levels while fighting in the UFC. People thought he was bipolar because there was so much controversy around him. Ironically, he was known as a nice guy outside the cage, but when the fight started, he became a completely different person. Regardless of this mess, his career in combat sports was actually a highly successful one. He went 8-4 in the UFC and held the World Series of Fighting welterweight belt and defended it twice. Of his 19 wins in MMA, 16 of them were submissions. Of those 16 submissions, 12 were leg locks, which is a ridiculously high rate. But unfortunately for him, he won't be remembered for that. So here's the story of how Rousimar Palhares became the most hated and dirtiest fighter of all time. Palhares grew up in extreme poverty in Torres do Indiaia, Brazil. He started working in farm fields at just 7 years old, where he supposedly had to eat pig slop from the farm he worked on because there wasn't enough food at home. It's also rumored that he had to live in a tent city underneath a bridge at just 12 years old. But when he turned 15, he met a local black belt and began training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He started seeing Jiu-Jitsu as an opportunity to make some money, so when he turned 16, he actually moved to Rio de Janeiro to start taking it seriously. Once in Rio, he sought out Brazilian Top Team, which was the best gym in Brazil at the time. With this legendary gym, he started competing in MMA and BJJ, but he was mostly focused on MMA. While he began his MMA career in 2004, his legendary coaches Murilo Bustamante and Bebeo Duarte convinced him to also compete in grappling in order to build up his name and promote his MMA career. In 2005, he won the Brazilian ADCC trials while he was still a purple belt. This was absolutely unheard of at the time. And for those of you who don't know, ADCC is the biggest tournament in grappling, and if you win the regional trials, you get an automatic invite to the finals. He didn't end up competing in these finals due to visa issues, but still, he had made a name for himself. By 2008, he had been fighting professionally for 3 years and had a record of 7-2 when he was finally signed by the UFC. In his first few years in the UFC, he won roughly 3 fights for every loss he took. In 2011, right in the midst of his UFC campaign, he defeated Dan Miller at UFC 134 in August. The very next month in September, he competed in ADCC 2011 and took silver, losing only to Andre Galvao, the winningest competitor in ADCC history. All 3 of his wins leading up to the finals came by heel hook. For context, grapplers in ADCC are almost always full-time grapplers. For Palhares to do this while focusing his time on MMA shows how talented he was. By this time, he was well known for being one of the best grapplers in the world, but also for being the dirtiest. Alright, so here's where the story gets juicy. Palhares has a laundry list of misconduct incidents, with the main repeating issue being holding on to submissions too long, as you know by now. He pulled this dick move so consistently that fighters started refusing to accept fights with him. Here's the chronological list of his major controversies. In March 2010, he was suspended by the UFC for not releasing a heel hook he used to submit Tomas Derval. In September 2011, he competed at the ADCC World Championships, which he missed weight for, by the way. And in the second round, he faced David Avayan and won via knee bar. But he gave the knee bar an extra crank, causing a commotion after the match from Avayan and his team. In the finals of the same ADCC, which he lost to Andre Galvao, the fight was stopped multiple times due to Palhares pulling Galvao's thumbs during submission attempts, which is highly illegal, and for clubbing Galvao over and over again. In December 2012, he tested positive for elevated testosterone levels after his fight against Hector Lombard, a fight in which he got knocked out via punches. In his very next fight in October 2013, he fought Mike Pierce and submitted him via heel hook 30 seconds into the fight. But once again, he held the submission long after Pierce tapped and the ref had to pull him off the submission. The UFC later stated that he didn't receive submission of the night for already receiving numerous warnings. The next day, Dana White announced that the UFC was releasing Palhares immediately for ignoring these warnings. He then signed with the World Series of Fighting, and in his first fight, he fought Steve Carl in March 2014. He landed a heel hook 1 minute into the fight, and what did he do? Say it with me, he held the heel hook too long yet again. His very next fight was against John Fitch in December of 2014. He won via knee bar, and while Fitch didn't complain, Toquinho absolutely held onto the knee bar for a couple seconds longer than he needed to, causing Fitch to need assistance leaving the cage. In August 2015, his very next fight after John Fitch, again, zero fucks given, he fought Jake Shields for the welterweight belt. He eye-gouged Jake over and over again for the first 2 rounds as Jake was out-fighting and out-grappling him. The ref stopped the fight temporarily for a warning, but Palhares couldn't have cared less. He ended up submitting Jake in the 3rd round with a Kimura. Jake tapped, and Rousimar didn't let go. Jake's coaches tried to rush the cage but were blocked from getting in and starting an all-out brawl. This made it literally 4 fights in a row where Palhares pulled this bullshit. The day after his Jake Shields fight, he was stripped of his belt and suspended indefinitely by the World Series of Fighting. The World Series of Fighting president and kickboxing legend Ray Sefo had warned Palhares multiple times, so he would actually never fight in their organization ever again. This Jake Shields incident would actually be the end of Palhares fighting in big-time promotions. He wore out his welcome, nobody stood up for him, and nobody trusted him. Since being cut from the World Series of Fighting, Toquinho's been fighting in small promotions in Italy, Poland, and Russia. And during this stretch, he's gone 1-1-5, with his most recent loss taking place in June of 2022. Palhares was knocked out in all 5 of these losses. So for some in the MMA community, that was sweet karma. On one hand, he literally had to eat pig slop as a child in order to not starve, so you could see why he's a loose cannon. But on the other hand, fuck that. He was causing injuries that prevented other fighters from feeding their families. So in my opinion, Rousimar Palhares is the dirtiest fighter we've ever seen in MMA or grappling. He could be revered for his insane submission skills and prowess as an MMA fighter, but now we'll just remember him as the most deliberately dirty fighter to ever compete in professional combat sports.